Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Kevin Cunningham, Chief Strategy Officer and founder for a company called SailPoint. Kevin, how are you?
Very good, John. Thanks for having me here.
I think the listeners may want to know what SailPoint's all about. Maybe give us a quick nutshell description of what SailPoint does.
Yeah, we're in the business of what's called identity governance. And really, fundamentally, what that's about is providing visibility and control over who has access to what. And on the surface, I know that sounds like a pretty simple problem to solve, but if you're talking about an organization with hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of employees and hundreds or thousands of applications, it's very easy to lose track of who has access to what and whether that's appropriate for their current relationship and role within the organization. So people change jobs, people come, people go, and keeping track of who has access to what is critical in providing a foundation of security for organizations.
Well, identity governance, Washington, D.C., the federal government, this is the sweet spots for you because every agency has that challenge, don't they?
I'd say every organization, both commercial and public sector, has this problem at some level. It's rare do I go in an organization with more than a couple thousand people that doesn't express some need for identity governance. It's been a historic problem across our industry from a high-tech perspective in terms of adoption of new technologies on a continuous basis, and therefore new expansion of the identity realm continues to happen, and it's really easy for people to lose sight of who has that access, those access privileges.
Well, the Pentagon's just crossed the river, so I'm going to use some military language here for you. Some will argue that the perimeter has been breached. And the perimeter, of course, is in the identity area. In fact, 3/5 of commercial organizations expect to be breached. So how does identity management protect data in these breaches?
Well, first, I should say that 5 out of 5 should expect to be breached.
Really?
Absolutely. So you either should expect to be breached or already have been breached, right? That is the only rational position to take in today's cyber criminal environment. So the other thing to think about is the perimeter itself, because the perimeter is not what it used to be. It used to be we set up firewalls and networks that would protect our organizations. Nowadays, with people using smart devices to access assets and applications that are in the cloud, that perimeter is really dissipated. So the perimeter, the physical perimeter that used to exist for many organizations no longer exists. So the role that identity plays in that is that if you think about the linkage between these various assets. So I'm an employee, I'm a contractor, I'm a business partner, and I'm accessing a SaaS application from my smartphone. I'm completely off the corporate network, right? The only thing that connects my access to that application, which may contain sensitive information, and my device is the identity. So unless you've got a good handle on managing and the visibility to that identity, you really don't have control over your environment anymore.
You know, there are phishing scams out there, and we know of them, where they can appropriate someone's identity credentials. And so your identity may be compromised, you may not even know it. And so what happens when your identity is compromised? Does your solution assist in that situation?
No, absolutely, John. And to your point, the cyber criminals of the world know that people are actually the weakest link in the security chain. Why is that? One, people tend to be trusting. That's why we're so susceptible to phishing and spear phishing and malware attacks, right? We want to trust that things would come our way. I get an email from a friend I recognize. My inclination is to click on the link he sent me. Maybe it's something interesting. I shouldn't do that until I verify that it is actually from my friend. So the cyber criminals of the world, and we're talking about very sophisticated cyber criminals. We're talking about foreign governments. We're talking about organized crime. We're talking about terror cells, are very, very clever in terms of how they try to compromise individuals. And oftentimes it is done through the compromise of a legitimate identity, legitimate password credential. Because the other thing about humans is we're also a little lazy, right? So we tend not to go through a lot of trouble to create very high-level security passwords. You know, password 123 I think is one of the most common passwords in use today. So the bad guys know that they can compromise people, and they use that as a leverage point to get inside the organization. And from there, they move around. And sometimes they move from organization to organization. So a lot of the breaches we hear about in headlines today actually started out with a breach of a vendor or a partner organization that ultimately found their way into the target group. The other thing to point out is once a bad guy gets inside or bad guys get inside an organization, they spend a lot of time looking around for sensitive information that they can steal. As a matter of fact, the average time from detection of breach to backing up until when the breach actually began is about 200 days. That's 200 days that somebody has been creeping around inside an organization looking for good information to abscond with.
In other words, if I steal your identity, I'm not going to broadcast it. I'm going to tool around the network and see what's going on. It's only when a system can identify unusual activities. Wait, what's Kevin doing this? He's normally home on Thanksgiving. What's going on here? So that's how your system seems to work, how behavior.
That's right. There's definitely a behavior component to this, and which is the next frontier for identity governance. So once you understand who has access to what from a static perspective and whether it's appropriate given their relationship with the organization, the next level of sophistication is understanding what they're doing with that access. So understanding behavioral patterns. So identity analytics is all about understanding norms and things that are abnormal. So much like when I travel abroad and I use my credit card for the first time, I typically get a text message or an email from my credit card company saying, hey, is this really you? We want to verify it because this is behavior that's not part of your normal routine. You're in a different country now using your credit card. So much like that, identity analytics takes a look at things that are abnormal. So through peer group analysis, for example, I've got a set of people in a similar department with a similar job function. They all have very similar access, except maybe one person has access to some strange systems. I should take a look at that because that's abnormal. Likewise, behavior. Sometimes it's not invalid access that would indicate a problem, but it's the unusual usage of that access. There was a well-publicized case of a manufacturing company who had a lot of patents as part of their portfolio. And one of the scientists who was responsible for developing a lot of those patents decided to leave the company. And he felt he had put so much work into those patents, he deserved to take them with him. So he actually had legitimate access to the IP database, but if anyone had been watching what he was doing with that access, he was downloading literally terabytes of data before he left the organization. So oftentimes it's not the static information that needs to be watched, but also what people are doing with their access privileges.
And they can change over time. I think we've learned that is just because someone is fine up until a certain point in time, there could be situations that can cause his behavior to change, but his status is still the same.
Absolutely. And I think the movement of people within organizations sometimes represents the biggest challenge. Because oftentimes, if I take a new role within an organization, oftentimes I have to maintain my old privileges for some period of time for a job transition. And when do you shut that off? I mean, one of the most famously publicized cases was Societe Generale, who had the rogue trader, if you recall that about 10 years ago. Turns out, he lost the bank about $10 billion. And the reason he was able to get away with that was he changed jobs within the bank. So he had what they call a middle office administrative job, which gave him certain privileged access to certain databases and applications. He changed job, became a trader. Nobody thought to turn off his old access. So he was able to cover his tracks for a long time by maintaining two sets of credentials.
My. We're going to have to pause here for a short break. My guest today is Kevin Cunningham, Chief Strategy Officer and founder, SailPoint. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, on the discussion, Federal Identity Governance, sponsored by SailPoint on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.